Channel open. Welcome back to WeeklyTrek, a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network. I am your host, Alex Perry.
What's today's date? The date.
Today's show was recorded on September 12th, 2020, and is current through the Star Trek Lower Decks episode Terminal Provocations, so beware of spoilers. Though, given Lower Decks is only available in North America right now, I will continue to note in the episode description the time codes for any Lower Decks discussion, so you can skip over it if you choose. All right, let's get into the show.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
WeeklyTrek is a 30-minute news show covering the biggest stories from the Star Trek franchise. We are in a new golden age of Star Trek. There are 6 television shows in production, possibly more on the way, and enough merchandise to fill the Bajoran wormhole. So stick with me and I'll help you sort the real facts from a lot of the Dominion propaganda that you'll find online. But I can't do this alone. And my guest this week is returning guest, Jamie McGregor. Jamie, welcome back to WeeklyTrek.
Thanks, Alex. Fantastic to be back on WeeklyTrek at a wonderful time for the franchise.
Oh, yes. Well, I think I probably can guess what your answer to this question is going to be. I mean, there might be multiple things, but I could probably guess what every one of them, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So I want to know something that's got you feeling good about Star Trek at the moment. What's got you moving at Warp 10?
Well, if we are in a new golden age of Star Trek, which you say at the top of every show, surely this week we were kind of wandering through El Dorado with these mysterious cities of gold. You know, we're seeing all of the celebration for Star Trek Day and the panels of all of our favorite stars chatting about the franchise. It has been so fantastic. And the joy is that there are pretty much panels for every incarnation of Trek, I think, except the animated series and the Kelvin timeline, probably. I think everyone else got at least some love across Star Trek Day. So that is what has got me moving at Warp 10. I really liked the Enterprise panel, funnily enough, because Enterprise is not actually my favorite incarnation of Trek, but the love those guys had for Scott Bakula was really real. And what they said about the way that he led the show as number 1 on the call sheet, just I thought was fantastic. The joy of watching them all react when LeVar Burton crashed the session. Of course, it was hosted by his daughter, which was lovely. And they also referred a lot to John Billingsley's activism, you know, walking the walk around his approach to changing the world in the way that he wants it to be. And on a day when Star Trek was supporting its own charities, I thought that was a really lovely thing as well.
Yeah. Obviously, the thing I'm also feeling good about this week was Star Trek Day. And, you know, we'll sort of talk about the newsier pieces of it when we get into the show, because that's pretty much all we have to talk about this week, because there was so much of it. But for the panels that were sort of, you know, not as newsy, quote unquote, you know, Deep Space Nine, the Voyager panel, the Enterprise panel, the TOS panel, where, you know, it was sort of definitely much more of a look back than it was a look forward. I mean, it was still just fabulous. I mean, you know, unfortunately, I think it's the closest we're going to come this year to a Star Trek convention. Cough, cough, STLV should be cancelled, cough, cough. And, you know, for the circumstances we find ourselves in, just what a fabulous way to celebrate the 54th anniversary of Star Trek. I mean, it was just so nice to get these folks back together. I mean, I talked about this a little bit last week, but I'll continue to gush about it. I mean, they got Scott Bakula, which is obviously, you know, feels very positively about his time on Star Trek. I mean, I think he's a bit bitter about the way the show ended, but the rest of the cast love him, and he's always so warm and gracious and generous every time he appears about his fellow cast, about Star Trek, about the fans. So yeah, I think the Enterprise panel with Scott, and then the Deep Space Nine panel where they were sort of memorializing the passing of Aaron and Renee, I think for me were sort of 2 highlights of the day as a whole. And then that very last panel with Patrick Stewart, Jonathan Frakes, and being interviewed by Will Wheaton, where they didn't talk all that much about like Picard looking forward. We didn't get any Picard news out of the day, but just listening to those 3 guys kind of talk to each other about what they mean to each other was really quite an emotional way to cap off the day.
Yeah, I mean, Will's a funny character because I love Will Wheaton, but he has this kind of little, you know, overly artificial style that I imagine, you know, might grate with some people, but it really helps. You can tell how much he loves the franchise and how much he respects all of the different actors and talent. For the DS9 one, I've seen notes of his on Facebook that he actually recently started a rewatch of DS9 in the wake of Aaron's death. And you can tell that he's now engaging with these people that he's kind of known through conventions and whatever in a different way now that he's actually seen more of the show. And what they all as a group said about Renee and Aaron, I would be lying if I said I didn't tear up a bit watching that, because it was, really heartfelt.
All right. Well, with that, let's turn to the week's top stories.
There's a war going on, and I'm a reporter.
We traveled into the future. 930 years. A one-way trip. No going back.
Welcome to Discovery. Come in. Discovery, do your copy?
You have reached year 3188.
Is there life here? Anywhere?
Multiple life signs detected.
We are completely disconnected, but we are also together.
You know, from around these parts, the Federation mostly collapsed after the burn.
What's the burn?
The burn was the day the galaxy took a hard left.
The Federation isn't just about ships. The Federation is its people.
I've always believed that you were out there somewhere, and that we were part of the Federation no matter what. Welcome to the future.
Dysfunction aside, you all make a pretty good team.
Dysfunction is the team.
We've just accepted it.
No, we haven't.
True believer.
Yeah.
Time traveler.
There was no other way.
The thing is, you got no authority here.
Let's show them who we are. We all want a future that's real, that matters. The Federation gave us the resources and the mandate to solve the biggest, most troublesome problems in the galaxy. And I may question, and I may fear, because the problems often seem insurmountable. But haven't we always risen to meet them? We have work to do, but if things were easy,
it wouldn't be worth it.
Yes, after weeks of me speculating on this show that a new Star Trek Discovery Season 3 trailer was on the way, in advance of the show's October 15th premiere in North America and October 16th premiere in the rest of the world, Star Trek Day finally delivered. Yes, as you just heard, we were treated to a new trailer for Discovery's third season as part of the Star Trek Day celebration that provided additional hints and teases about what to expect this year. Burnham and the USS Discovery arrive in the year 3188, after some kind of cataclysmic event known as the Burn has brought the Federation to its knees. A few details we were able to pick out from the trailer include Burnham back in her gold uniform for the first time since the first season, new series stars David Ajala playing Cleveland Booker, Blue DeBarrio as Adira, and Ian Alexander as Gray. In addition, it looks like Saru's stint in the captain's chair might have become permanent. In a few quick shots of the character, he is seen wearing the gold-shouldered uniform of Discovery-era captains, and it looks like his comm badge has the requisite 4 pips on it to denote his command of the USS Discovery. So we might be looking at Captain Saru this season, which would be the first time on Star Trek the captain of the series' lead vessel was an alien. In addition to all the details in the trailer, Discovery's producers also unveiled a new logo for the show. Alex Kurtzman, in speaking at the Star Trek Day Discovery panel, described how the first season logo had been designed with the Klingon War in mind. With that storyline now over and Discovery moving into the far future, a new logo felt right and will be the series' main logo moving forward. And perhaps my favorite of the announcements about Discovery Season 3, we're getting a cat. In a video short, we were introduced to the main coon, Liu, who will play the role of Grudge the cat on Discovery Season 3, who belongs to the David Ajala's character, Cleveland Book Booker. Liu is a gorgeous, gigantic, fluffy Maine Coon who looks a lot like a larger version of my own cat, Nutmeg. So you can imagine that I am just thrilled. So CBS, let's get some Grudge cat merchandise out there because the money is burning a hole in my bank account and I am ready to give it to you. So Jamie, in addition to, of course, being excited about the addition of Grudge the cat, how excited does all this have you for Discovery's third season?
Come on, Alex. Star Trek is all about representation, right? And the cats need to see themselves on screen.
Exactly.
So I think that's going to be fantastic for all the ensign gravies out there. And certainly Trek Twitter or Trek Cat Twitter lit up with that announcement. I saw a lot of people delighted at that news, and it does look like a very cute cat. So I can't wait to see how well Grudge goes on screen. I do obviously hugely excited to see the season 3 trailer, and all I can say is I'm just really excited to see where Discovery goes, free from constraints of kind of like canon, and also with a production team that's very settled. My memory, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think this is the first season where the showrunner has stayed the same all the way through.
You are 100% right about that.
With the writing staff all, on the same page from beginning to end. So for me, this is the moment where Discovery can really mark itself as putting in place what it really wants to achieve, and I'm really excited to see that. There's obviously an element of optimism and about fighting for, without going into any spoilers, it's quite clear the Federation isn't what it was, and there is going to be a move towards recapturing that. And I think that, whether that's some response to fan criticism or just, the next story that needs to be told is either way, I'm up for it. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean, back before, we knew anything about Star Trek Discovery, I think, my preference at the time was for them to do a sort of next generation style move into the future, right? Put it a certain distance beyond the Star Trek that we knew so that, you could kind of call back to that time, but you had a bunch of freedom to sort of do different things with it. And I think it took them 2 seasons to sort of realize that was the right direction to go in. And they sort of came up with a way of getting there. But, 3188 is very clearly sort of placed in the timeline of Star Trek to be beyond anything that's happened before. Crewman Daniels from Enterprise and the whole temporal Cold War arc, that was like 100 years prior to this.
That's ancient history now.
Exactly. That was as Picard was to Kirk, so, Discovery Season 3 is to Daniels. And even things like the other time we've seen sort of that far into the future is in Voyager's Living Witness, where, the Doctor's sort of backup program is reactivated. Even that is about 100 years prior to this happening. So we really sort of are kind of well out there into the future, and, it allows them to do anything they want with it. But you can already tell from the trailer, like there are sort of different bits and pieces that very clearly tie back into the rest of the world as we know and understand it, right? This is not, I think one of my fears when they announced Discovery, when the season finale happened and the ship goes 1,000 years into the future, was that this show was going to become sort of a generic sci-fi show with a Star Trek skin on it. And I think the trailer and everything they've said about the show up to this point kind of puts entirely to bed that concern. I think this is still very much a Star Trek show. It's clear that, there are elements of sort of Federation mythology, of Trill mythology, of a number of these different races who are going to, continue to appear, might be in sort of different forms and have different relationships with each other. But this does continue to be a Star Trek show. And I think, one of the things that the trailer has done is sort of demonstrate that Michael Burnham herself is, sort of has a very different personality now. I mean, she's, as much as we love Discovery Season 1 and 2, I mean, it did present us quite a morose main character, right? I mean, Burnham's always been a character who is very emotionally compromised around certain decisions she's made. And this trailer sort of shows a character who is happy and celebrating and cheering. And I'm sure it will be a difficult time and they will have many trials to get through. But I think that also will have a big impact on the tone of the show overall, now that the main character has sort of moved past her emotional trauma and is, sort of charting a new path for herself.
Yes, one of the things that you had said actually last week on WeeklyTrek was that where, seasons 1 and 2 dipped into the TOS mythology, it looked like season 3 was going to dip into some DS9 mythology. And so the concerns about this being just a generic sci-fi show, leaving all of the kind of Trek elements for dead as we head a gazillion years into the future, I think we can be pretty sure that's not going to happen. And we're all excited to see the Lurians and Trill and whoever else they managed to build into a world in which the Federation, is a fractured shadow of what it previously was. I will also say on the logo, I do like the new logo, and I think it seems to be the same font as the disco T-shirts that they've used previously.
Yeah, I think you're right.
That's a nice tie-in.
Yeah, it's a nice sign. I really like the new logo. It's clean, it's futuristic, and it also actually, they do seem to be kind of developing a consistent franchising branding identity for each of these shows, where you've got the sort of TOS style Star Trek and then the specific series logo beneath it. We've now seen that for Picard. We've got that for Lower Decks. They've set that up for Prodigy, and now Discovery has sort of come into alignment with all of those, so you could put all of the show names up on a board and it, you would have that consistency to it, which I think is cool as well.
Absolutely.
Well, Star Trek Discovery was not the only show we got some new details about. We also learned a bit about what to expect from the remainder of the first season of Star Trek Lower Decks, thanks to a new trailer for the last 5 episodes of the season.
She never fails to take my breath away.
I wish I could kiss her and squeeze her.
Excuse me?
The Cerritos is a handsome lady.
You're damn right about that. Warp me! I updated the dog.
It just looks like a normal dog.
Wake me up if it turns into something I need to care about.
Intruders beaming in! Looks like we'll have to repel them the old-fashioned way, setting my fists to stun and my kicks to kill.
You just instigate chaos.
It's helpful character-building chaos. I work with my best of friends.
Look at this new button. Sexy mode. Don't mind if I do.
I would never put anyone in danger.
Mariner, in case we don't make it.
We're making it.
Voila!
Anyway.
You probably didn't notice because that was an audio clip, and you didn't get to see the fabulous visuals, but we know our first returning legacy character in Star Trek Lower Decks thanks to that trailer, and it's Q. Yes, series creator Mike McMahon revealed in the Star Trek Day panel that John Delancey would be returning to voice a brief cameo as the character of Q. And in the trailer, we got a quick glimpse of the character, resplendent in his judge robes seen in the TNG pilot Encounter at Farpoint and finale All Good Things. In addition to Delancey's Q, McMahon also revealed that Kurtwood Smith, who appeared most famously as the Federation president in Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, and as Anarax in Star Trek Voyager's Year of Hell, would also be voicing a new role on the series. Delancey and Smith join actor J.G. Hertzler, who was the first returning actor to Lower Decks in this week's most recent episode. Jamie, despite being on Australia, I've got a question for you. 1, have you found a way to watch Lower Decks this first season? Beep once for yes and 2 for no. And are you excited about the possibility of Q returning to the franchise?
Can I say beep on both counts? That's a yes. Yes, I have managed to find a way. We will never know how. Otherwise, I fear being sent to Rurapente. But I definitely have seen Lower Decks, and am absolutely I'm really enjoying each week's episode. I feel that J.G. Hertzler got a bit of a rough deal because that was kind of thrown in there with very little fanfare. But as soon as I think it was the Drukmani captain appeared on screen saying a few things, I was like, hang on, I know that voice. And of course, we're looking forward to Q, although Mike McMahon did say it was a very small role. And I'm sitting here going, don't tease us, man. Just make it a Q episode. Just make it a, right. I don't want a cameo. I want to see as much Q as I possibly can. So yeah, absolutely looking forward to all of that. And I will say, just for the last episode, which I really enjoyed. Having said that, this type of animated humor that they go for isn't it's not 100% my jam. They kind of dial every moment up to 11. So I'm enjoying this evil, sinister version of Clippy. And then Badgie just like starts dismembering people. And I'm like, okay, that's too far for me. But, having said that, I love what Mike McMahon's done. And quite frankly, all the haters can go pound sand. Lower Decks is awesome. And I'm so glad it's part of the franchise. And yeah, can't wait to see the legacy character of Q return. And Alex, hopefully it is the first of many, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think he sort of talked about how in season 1 there were kind of a couple of, well-chosen cameos. And I think, we now know what one of those is in Q. And my guess is that once they've sort of done a bit more to establish Lower Decks and its own characters, for season 2, maybe they'll turn a bit more towards reaching into the deep bench of possible, returning actors and characters that they could do. I actually really liked that there was no hoopla around the return of J.G. Hertzler, because as you say, he has such a distinctive voice that for most kind of big fans, certainly fans of Deep Space Nine, you're going to watch that Lower Decks episode and same as you, it's going to be like immediately just like, hold on a minute, is that J.G. Hertzler? And it actually is. So that was very cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm also really enjoying Lower Decks. I definitely see your point around the style of the show. I mean, it definitely sort of sits in as a sort of conventional adult animated comedy in that regard, where each moment is sort of pushed to the max for kind of maximum humor potential. And for some people that works. And for other people, it doesn't. And honestly, I think a lot of the reasons why folks out there maybe aren't resonating with the show, for those who aren't resonating with it, I would speculate that a big kind of piece of that is, I would venture to guess that they are not fans of other adult animated comedies that aren't Star Trek, like your Family Guys and your Rick and Mortys and your sort of Simpsons type shows, particularly those shows from like the last 10 years, because I think Lower Decks does kind of fit very comfortably into the pantheon of those kind of shows. And that either works for you or it doesn't. And I think the thing about new Star Trek is there's so much of it, right? I mean, if you didn't like Lower Decks, all you had to do was wait 10 weeks and Discovery Season 3 was coming back. And if you don't like Discovery Season 3, all you've got to do is wait till next year and you've got Prodigy, which is a different style of animated show, and you've got Picard and you've got Strange New Worlds. I mean, we really are starting to see this play out in action of these different kinds of shows that maybe aren't going to be for everybody, but for which they're going to be for somebody, and you're going to get people who are sort of mix and matching shows, and who are not going to be like us and sort of watch and love and enjoy everything. So I think we're probably in the very small minority, and obviously they would like it if fans loved everything, but they don't need fans to love everything. They're looking to engage new fans in different ways who might like those things, but who maybe don't like some of the stuff that's been done before. So, I think Lower Decks continues to chart its own course in that regard. I think it's fabulous. I've really enjoyed this first season. I think it's actually probably one of the most successful first seasons of any Star Trek franchise. And I can't wait to see where they take it.
Well said. And it's going to be hard for Star Trek to find new fans in new places if you just keep doing exactly the same thing you've always done. So I'm all on board with the current approach.
And I think that's the lesson from the early 2000s, right? Which is, Deep Space Nine sort of changed up the formula from the Next Generation. Voyager went back to that formula. Enterprise doubled down on that formula. And by the time Enterprise was cancelled, the lesson was that they had sort of run through all of the fans who were really interested in that kind of Star Trek. And so I think, there's been a lot of conversation over the last year around, the potential for franchise fatigue. They're announcing all these different shows. But I think the big difference between what they're doing now versus what they were doing in the late 90s, early 2000s, when Star Trek really did suffer from franchise fatigue, is making these shows different enough that they're not necessarily drawing on the same audience every time for each of these shows, in the same way that Rick Berman and Brannon Braga wanted the Voyager audience to carry over to the Enterprise audience, and, found themselves being not super successful at doing that.
There will be a subsection of people for whom, the real hardcore fans who will enjoy and love and watch every moment of every show. And I suspect the Venn diagram of that and the Venn diagram of WeeklyTrek listers may be close to a circle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think you're probably right about that. First announced at San Diego Comic-Con's Enter the Star Trek Universe panel last year, The new official Star Trek podcast finally has a name and a launch date, and it's actually very soon. It will coincide with the drop date for this episode. Star Trek, the Pod Directive, will launch its first season on September the 14th. Previously announced host Ensign Mariner herself, that's Tawny Newsome, will be joined by comedian Paul F. Tompkins in anchoring the first season of the show. The show will feature interviews with Star Trek creatives, as well as prominent figures from media, politics, and entertainment, such as actor Ben Stiller, politician Stacey Abrams, and Discovery actor Tig Notaro. The Pod Directive is available to subscribe to now on most podcast platforms, and CBS released a short preview of the upcoming show.
I'm Tawny Newsome.
And I'm Paul F. Tompkins.
And we're hosting the official Star Trek podcast, Star Trek, The Pod Directive.
It is official. We're huge Star Trek fans talking to other huge Star Trek fans who just happen to be award-winning actors, writers, politicians.
We even got a real-life astronaut in there and more. We're talking to them all about their love of Star Trek, how it influences their everyday lives, and how it continues to impact them and the world around them.
Subscribe now to Star Trek The Pod Directive on Apple Podcasts.
Live long and prosper.
Engage.
No.
What do you mean, no?
Jamie, will you be subscribing to the Pod Directive?
Absolutely. I think everyone can agree that the one thing the world doesn't have enough of is Star Trek podcasts. So I'll be honest here. I don't know of Paul F. Tompkins' oeuvre that well. I used to listen to, actually, Neil deGrasse Tyson had a podcast called Star Talk, and
yes,
he was on that as a comedian, I think, a few times. So I know him from that. I did not know that Tawny Newsome was such a huge Star Trek fan. We haven't really mentioned it, but a new episode of The Ready Room also dropped with an interview between Will Wheaton and the 4 ensigns from Lower Decks. And it kind of got missed in all of the Star Trek Day panels. But I watched that, and Tawny outlined the fact that she was a real Trek fan, and that she had one parent who was a hardcore DS9 fan, one parent who was a hardcore Voyager fan, and she said they all came together as a family for TNG. I'm kind of like, now that sounds like the kind of person we need in the franchise, and who I am absolutely okay with hosting the official Star Trek podcast. Does sound like they're going to do some interviews with Trek fans in public life, which I think is cool. And I hope they've done their research and they've listened to, John Krikorian's Trek Profiles to learn how to do that well. And, if anyone out there hasn't listened, you can start with Alex's episode if you've got a spare 6 hours. Anyway, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be great. I loved Jordan Hoffman's previous iteration of the official podcast, but, I'm glad they're putting a fresh face on it, and with someone who's obviously a keen fan of the franchise.
Yeah, one thing I kept thinking about while I was listening to the preview of the show was that it's sort of like an A-lister's Trek Profiles, right? John's Trek Profiles is for all of us, and then the Pod Directive is for the Ben Stillers and the Stacey Abrams and the Tig Notaros of the world, right?
Are you saying John can't drag those people? I'm sure he's not so far away from the A-listers. One day.
I'm sure John could do anything he sets his mind to, that's for sure. I just think that CBS has easier access to some of these people than any of us do.
Fair point.
Yeah, I think this is going to be fun. And I continue to be thoroughly impressed and besotted with Tawny Newsome, not just because of her fabulous portrayal as Mariner on Lower Decks, but in everything that I have sort of seen her in since she was sort of announced as being associated with the Star Trek franchise. And so I'm really looking forward to this. Yeah, like you, I don't really know Paul F. Tompkins' work very well, but I know he's, they're both sort of professional podcasters who have been doing it for years. So, it's certainly going to be a slick show, I think, that's going to be, well produced and hopefully sort of really appeal to Trek fans. And I'd be some of these guests, I'm sort of really fascinated to hear their Star Trek stories. Stacey Abrams did an interview with the New York Times while she was running for governor of Georgia, where she talked about her Star Trek fandom a little bit, and I've always wanted to kind of know a bit more about her since then. And so I think this is a cool idea. And then they sort of mixed in some of the current creatives from the Star Trek franchise. So Mike McMahon is doing an episode, the Lower Decks creator, Jeff Russo, the composer for of Picard and Discovery is doing an episode. Tig Notaro, who plays Reno on Discovery, is doing an episode. I think it's probably going to be the kind of thing where it's like they do sort of 10 to 12 episodes and then they take a long break and come back with another 10 to 12 episodes. But still, you know, it's been a long time since it was first announced at San Diego Comic-Con last year, and I'm pleased it's finally happening. And just what the world needs right now is another Star Trek podcast. But CBS has access to people and interviews that the rest of us, you know, probably will never get the opportunity to do. So a welcome addition nonetheless, even if it means I have to find even more time in the week to listen to podcasts.
I feel your pain.
And lastly, Star Trek Day had a number of announcements of new Star Trek merchandise. We'll cover a number of them in the weeks ahead. But this week, I wanted to focus on what I thought was the biggest announcement of the day. Following the roaring success of the sale of both the Enterprise A and the Excelsior teacups from the Undiscovered Country, Factory Entertainment have announced they will be producing a replica of Captain Picard's Ressikan Flute from the iconic episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, The Inner Light. TrekCore got an exclusive up-close look at the new product, which has been recreated using reference from the original assets still in possession at CBS. In addition to the flute itself, Factory Entertainment are manufacturing the box that Picard finds the flute in at the end of the episode. Like the original prop, Factory Entertainment's replica is not a playable musical instrument. However, to tide you over, the box features a hidden sound feature that allows you to play Jay Chataway's flute music composed for the episode. And if you're really crafty, you could also get somebody else's hands to press on the flute while you try and play. Enjoys the next generation.
I found that funny, yes.
The Ressikan Flute is available for pre-order now and will go into production early next year. You can pre-order for an early bird price of $250 today. That price will increase to $275 if you wait until October. And I will confess, I did place an order, and at this point, they're only running a $50 deposit on your credit card, so you will not owe them the full amount today. Factory expects to manufacture less than 2,000 of these, so if you are interested, we highly recommend signing up soon. Jamie, Factory Entertainments have launched themselves onto the Star Trek merchandise market in a big way in the last couple of months. They've done the Enterprise A teacup, the Excelsior teacup, now the Picard Ressikan Flute. What do you think they should do next?
What should they do next? I think they should do that giant chance-altering device from Rivals, DS9. There you go. There's a deep cut for you. There's a deep cut for you. If you're going to get this, you're going to have to reenact the scene from Lessons. So you're going to need to have that 2D backdrop, painted backdrop of the Jeffries tube, right, to put behind you. So you can just make the whole scene come alive. I will say this is the kind of thing that I'd be like really absolutely up for. I've actually got an album called Smooth Federation, which has like all these Trek themes played by a jazz trio. And the Inner Light theme is like one of my favorite tracks out of that album. But I hate to say it, like with Lower Decks and with the Star Trek wines, it doesn't always pay to be an international Trek fan. And when I recently returned to Australia from the States, I may have taken numerous of these Star Trek wines back with me. But I did look this up, and international shipping is only $84 American to Australia, and I'm afraid I can't justify the 460 Australian dollar dues that it would take to get this particular item in my possession, but I am really delighted for hardcore collectors who are going to get to add this, because as you've already said about the previous stuff that Shout Factory have done, it does look like they are actually doing really nice work for showing a huge amount of respect for collectors, that they're really doing important items that people are going to appreciate, and they're doing them well. So long may they continue to do that, even if they don't do the device from Rivals.
Yeah, the one potential, of course, it always sucks to be an international fan, but I sometimes feel like part of the reason why I moved to America in the first place was just so I didn't have to suffer the indignity of not being in America and being a Star Trek fan anymore. And 12 years later, I'm still there. But I think one of the potential sort of points of hope is that unlike Star Trek wines and some of these other licensees, Factory Entertainment actually does, I've noticed for some of their other brands, do a pretty good job of like distributing to other distributors who then, you know, maybe are in other countries around the world. So like you can buy all their stuff in the US, not just through their website, but you can also get it through Entertainment Earth and Amazon and places like that. Obviously the teacups were a convention exclusive, so those were only run through the Factory Entertainment website. But, you know, for something like this where, you know, it will be a limited run, but it won't be a super limited run. I think part of the reason why they're doing this pre-order now is to kind of figure out how many of these to make. make, hopefully that means that, some of them will find their way out to, maybe comic book stores across the world, and that folks will have the opportunity to buy them and not have to pay $100 in shipping in order to get it from the US.
I hope so. And if I do come across that, this is one of those kind of classic Trek items that, to be loved to have, as a memento of the show.
All right. Well, we've talked about the facts, and now let's speculate on what's going to happen in the future of Star Trek.
You make some very good points, Captain. But it's still all speculation and theory.
So each week, I and my guest give you a wish or theory we're nurturing about any of the shows or the future of the franchise. So Jamie, let's hear your theory or wish for this week.
This is a crazy one, even crazier than Rivals. So here we go. So in the Strange New Worlds panel,
yes,
I don't know if you remember hearing a bit of banter between kind of Rebecca Roman and Akiva Goldsman about the competition in the Rebecca, Jerry O'Connell household about who's the best first officer, right?
Right.
And they were talking about a crossover between Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks.
Yep.
Kind of Roger Rabbit style, if you can imagine. Now, they were having a joke, and it's a bit ridiculous, but it got me thinking. I couldn't help but notice when I was watching that Ready Room episode with the 4 ensigns that I was talking about, that all 4 of those actors really do resemble their animated counterparts relatively closely. And I just thought, what would be lovely is, if we're doing, short treks win that Emmy, and then with all of that extra cash, let's do a little episode with those 4 actors as their animated selves in a kind of limited, very short episode. And I think that they could easily play their characters in real life. So there you go. That is not going to happen, but it's a wish for the franchise. How does that sound?
That's awesome. I love that. Maybe you could even do it as like a Picard era short trek. So, put them kind of 20 years beyond the setting of the show. Give them, just a little aging makeup, a little gray in the hair, and put them in the Picard style uniforms and sort of have them come back together for one, very short mission that sort of references the fact that, they'd spent time on the Cerritos and all of that. I think, that'd be cool. They definitely do seem to have sort of based the look of each of these characters on the actors themselves a little bit. And JJ Lendl, who does a lot of kind of fan art on Twitter, did a version of the Lower Decks poster where he did it with the actors as the characters, and it does look spectacular. So I think that's awesome. I think they should absolutely do something like that. Like, just what a fun way of kind of tying the live action and the animation in together.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think Jerry O'Connell is quite as anatomically as accurate as perhaps he has appeared on the show. So, or if so, they'd have to give him plenty of time to get into the gym before shooting. So, they better pre-announce that episode in advance. But hey, Alex, get writing that script. I like that script. You've taken my pitch and made it better. Make that episode.
I mean, they've done it before in Star Trek. You had this show called the Animated Series in which they based the appearances of the characters off of the actors like William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelley. And then to prove that it was canon, they put them all in a movie called Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I mean, can you believe it?
Absolutely. So let's just do it all over again.
All right. So my theory this week is a Discovery Season 3 theory. My guess is, this season's Red Angel is going to be the burn. What's it going to be?
Yes.
Uncovering the mystery of this cataclysmic event that, as Alex Kurtzman described it, the sort of quote unquote fall of the Federation was not caused because the Federation sort of collapsed in on itself. It was caused by this sort of outside force. So I have a theory about the burn, which I'm going to throw out there. It's not actually my theory. I've seen this kind of bandied around a few places. I apologize. I don't know who was the person who originally came up with it, but all credit to them, no credit to me. I'm just co-opting it. My theory is that the burn involved the detonation of a number of omega molecules in the 32nd century, which has made warp travel almost impossible across the Federation, which has led to the collapse of the Federation, and then provides Discovery kind of a really important role in the story because they have a form of propulsion that is not warp drive in the spore drive that would allow them to be basically one of the few people who could sort of travel across the galaxy because they could use the spore drive rather than the warp drive and, sort of start stitching back together these planets who have fallen out of contact because they can't travel between each other anymore. Whether or not that theory ends up being even close to true, I don't know, but it does kind of provide a really good role for this, 1,000-year anachronistic starship coming into the future that supposedly is going to have, at least at one point, a really technologically advanced society that was very competent in the use of time travel, provide them with a reason to be important in that future. So that is my theory. Jamie, what do you think?
Wow, I like it. And I'm not sure what to think, because if it was your theory personally, given your tremendously variable track record, I wouldn't know what to think.
Yeah, I mean, if it was my theory personally, it would 100% be wrong. But because it's somebody else's theory, I think there's a chance.
Yeah. Now I don't know what to think. And I like it a lot. I'm also wondering how Calypso might factor into that. Where are the, I apologize, where are the timeframes for where Calypso winded up to when this series is taking place?
Yeah, that we don't know. So all we know about Calypso is that it's set 1,000 years after the crew of the Discovery say, stay here, we're all leaving.
Right. Okay.
I think the assumption is that meant it was 1,000 years after the events of Discovery Season 1, and therefore roughly in the same time period in which the show is now set. But Zora claims the ship's been abandoned for 1,000 years. So, and it sort of traveled into the future. So I don't know, that's really unclear. We might get more detail on that. It might sort of still sit as a big question mark in the franchise.
Right. Though. It was a relative time period, not a specific time period.
Correct.
So it could theoretically be another 1,000 years hence.
It could
after
be. Yeah. It could be 4,100. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Hey, I'm on board with that. That sounds like a great pitch for making season 3. All of the different elements that you've just described fit in nicely with what we've seen in the trailer. So yeah, that's a great theory. I like it. Let's see what happens.
Do you have a theory or a wish for Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, or the future of the franchise that you'd like to share? Tweet them to me at WeeklyTrek, and I might feature your theory in a future episode. Well, that's all the time we've got for this episode of Weekly Trek. Thank you so much to my guest, Jamie McGregor, for joining me today. Jamie, how can people contact you if they want to continue the conversation?
You can find me on Twitter at jmac_ref, JMAC_REF. Always happy to talk Trek with anyone out there, and thank you so much for having me on the show.
Always a pleasure, Jamie. And you can find the show on Twitter at WeeklyTrek and me at Alexander T. Perry. And if you enjoy the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. And please check out some of the other great shows on the Tricorder Transmissions. And if you like our shows, please also consider becoming a Patreon of Tricorder, which you can find at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. And lastly, if you're looking for Star Trek news on the internet, I hope you will turn to trekcore.com. Well, thank you, Jamie. Thank you to all of my listeners. And until next week, live long and prosper.